This time, he will be joined by some reinforcements. So while the gentlemen are taking their seats, I would like to quickly introduce them. Mr. Stefan Berg, Head of Product Management for Wireline Swisscom B2B. Mr. Daniel Bertolo, Head Network for Switch. Sam Hitz, hi Sam, CTO of Anapaya. Mr. Eliseo Rodriguez, Head of Connectivity of B2B at Sunrise UPC, sorry, and of course, Mr. Thomas Wacker, Director of Core Network Engineering for UBS. They will be participating in this roundtable on their experiences with SCiON so far and their vision for its future applications. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Leah, for this introduction. Thanks, everybody, for joining in for this roundtable, Stories from the Field. And that is touches on the early and more recent deployments of SCiON out there in the field. And I would like to open this round here with asking each of the panelists a question on what your role is within the organization and in terms of SCiON, and how you got involved with SCiON in the first place. Maybe Stefan, can you just start with this?
Yeah, I got into it a couple of years already. Swisscom has sponsored the research or the work of the ETH for many years, and then naturally we had an interest to understand what can we do with it. So the first cases were on international connectivity, and then later on along came SSFN, which really boosted the whole discussion also internally in our organization as part of a network technology, or as it is a network technology, it's natural that it falls into a wireline or connectivity portfolio in Swisscom.
Thank you. Daniel, over to you.
My role at Switch is that I'm responsible for the network. So we're the ISP of academia and research in Switzerland. And therefore, we've been contacted by the ETH, by Adrian Perrick very early on in the development. I think it was 2015, the first time when he wanted to deploy SCiON in the real world network to test it together with Swisscom, to have multiple ISPs involved. So this was the very first contact with SCiON. And from then on, there have been multiple projects. One of them was within the ETH domain, providing SCiON to all institutions of the ETH domain. And the second one then was the SSFN, which is currently ongoing. So those are the big points we covered in SCiON so far.
Thank you very much. Let me jump over to Thomas, because I want to take Sam last, because he has a special role here amongst the panelists. So Thomas, please.
Yeah, so I work for UBS, as you see up there, and UBS has been interested in the technology on a number of levels since probably 2018 or so. It started out as a pure, let's say, research interest, and for a enterprise like UBS, it takes quite a bit something to do exploratory technology. In my role, which is essentially to develop stuff that goes into production. So I'm not in Chief Technical Office, which would do usually exploratory stuff. And that's really been the challenge. And we've been able to bridge that gap between pure interest and research to production now with the SSFN as a driver. That has been imperative. And interestingly, up to the head of technology in UBS, interest then grew out of that. So now, when we brought SSFN online and we hit a snag or two, I ended up being in a position to report to very senior people within UBS. So that's been a very interesting and slightly touchy but also rewarding experience. So SSFN has really jump-started the actual implementation and the getting of finance, and because we are paying some of the people that sit here for services, and that's always where we see the real proof.
Thank you, Thomas. Eliseo, what's your view?
So we came, I think, in comparison with Swisscom, we came a bit of as a latecomer to the discussion on the technology. It has been a ride from the beginning. I think we frown upon provider-independent discussions, usually on the ISP development. That was, I remember, my first impression when I heard about SCiON. But we have discussed about that, Fritz, and also with Christopher. And for the application, it was very clear from the beginning that the requirements met by the technology were spot on, the requirements that you guys had. So I'm responsible for the productization of the technology within Sunrise UPC and the development, and it has been really a learning experience. How we have gone, I think, a long way since the first discussions. We have had many proof of concepts. They have been very successful. Things have worked out technologically as well as with the different parties involved. So I think the experience has been good. The learning continues to go on, and we're looking forward to continue on this journey.
Thank you, Eliseo. And then last but not least, Sam, please.
Yeah, as I said, my role is maybe a bit different from the other panelists. I'm the CTO and also a co-founder of Anapaya. So we're the main SCiON technology provider for the SCiON production network, on which also the SFN is built. My journey started way earlier with SCiON. I think I joined Adrian Perrick's group in 2013, first as a master's student and as a PhD student. So I was doing research into SCiON. Now in my 9th years working on SCiON, actually. Then 2017 we founded Anapaya, actually very much on the push of the Swiss National Bank and William Boy in particular. They wanted to try out this new technology within their own networks. So that's when we founded Anapaya. And well, at first I had to take care, of course, of many things, not just building the product and engineering the technology. By now, I'm mostly focusing on research and development on the engineering at Anapaya. And also I'm involved in many kind of technical consultant tasks, such as also the SFN, the technical concepts behind it, also how we can separate governance from the technical layer and things like this. This is where I spend most of my time on.
Now, compared to other technologies out there in the internet, SCiON is fairly new and therefore sort of, one could say, even untested in the field. What is your experience so far? So maybe that question goes to the providers. Daniel, if you could share your view on the experience with SCiON as technology.
Well, I think the most important obstacle to come by was actually to gain knowledge about SCiON. So bring the knowledge into the team, bring everybody up to speed. So this is still ongoing. So compared to having 30 years of IP experience, SCiON is pretty new. But then we've had very good support from Anapaya, providing good technological backup, as well as also helping with the deployment and all this stuff. So the overall experience so far has been actually really good.
Maybe Stefan, if you could elaborate a bit on this as well, the experience, but also on how to productize and offer services with and on SCiON. What is your experience there?
The obstacles, I think you went in the same direction, are not so much technology and understanding it. Although you have to like this community use case with SSFN, you have to think a bit different. I think the obstacle is now mostly in finding other use cases like SSFN where somebody is willing to step forward and take this governance role. William or you mentioned a couple of deployment cases and finding there's somebody who's taking the lead. I think that's, in my opinion, the biggest obstacle now. And then if you want broader deployment of SCiON also in the residential use cases, finding suitable business models that work for everybody. So creating a win-win where people are also willing to contribute for the benefit of having it then. From a productification, what was important to me was that we try to limit the entry hurdle for using it. And that, getting it into the standard products which we have, that was our strategy there. And therefore, it should be easy for everybody now following the SSFN to make the step into a SCiON community. And that was a philosophy we followed when we thought about how to productify it and how to get it into the mass production, so to say.
Mm-hmm. How do you see the market there, Eliseo? Are companies willing to pay and willing to switch over from existing technology over to SCiON?
No. So I think the technology, it says, fulfills a very specific requirement in a very elegant way, which is mostly a requirement of security. And so from that sense, it becomes more and more relevant as I would say, as the telco evolves and we're faced with more security problems in general. I think that the security discussion is a topic that big companies and international companies are dealing with. They're facing this issue of, oops, I've never been attacked, and now I have been attacked, and what do we do now? So I think in terms of the market approach, it's a very welcome discussion to talk about how problems are resolved, and in a way that is, I think, from a technology point of view, comprehensive, because sorts of avoids the problem before it happens. So rather than having the problem in your firewall, in your location, you solve it before that happens. So from that point of view, I think it's so as I said, I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, it's well received. On the other hand, it's new. And I think the recognition or the understanding of the concept and how that changes the way of work, and also the expertise on the technology. I think these are the topics that I see more of the short-term challenge. Of course, the know-how it happens as we speak. It happens when we talk to the customers. They ask questions. Anapaya support is great in this regard. But it will need also some time. It will need time for the technical expertise to be built. So for the engineers who actually have to maintain and configure, that has to be built. I think in terms of sales, also sales have to become acquainted on, what's the use of the technology, how do we talk about customers about it, and what does it solve? Which is at the core of the discussion is what problem does it solve? And yes, I think that these are the two elements where I see a challenge: the understanding and the know-how build-up.
We have seen adoptions of this type of technology this morning from Professor Adrian Perrick, like SBAS, for instance. Sam, what do you think in terms of adoption? Is it more important that you gain telcos, ISPs as your customers, or is it equally or even more important to gain enterprise customers as end customers then?
Well, it's a good question. It's a difficult one to answer because one influences the other, of course. I think the biggest challenge here is this chicken and egg problem, right? Where, of course, SCiON is a network. It offers path control. It profits a lot from path diversity through multipathing, through optimizing different metrics, such as screen routing, for example, is just an example of this, right? And of course, path diversity only exists if telcos are on board. That's, so to speak, the cost of the technology, that we don't just run as an overlay on the internet, but actual SCiON router, SCiON infrastructure need to be deployed in the infrastructure of network operators. So from a technical perspective, I would say it's more important for the network as a whole that more ISPs are there, that this path diversity is really there, that we can show also the improved performance of the technology, performance not only like in throughput or latency, but also in resiliency or these new use cases like CO2 optimization, like price optimization. But then of course, ISPs, they will only join the network if there is also a business case, right? And so this has been, I would say, the biggest challenge for us as a vehicle to get this technology out from the research lab into the real world. How to overcome this chicken and egg problem, and of course initiatives like the SFN that immediately bring together a bigger set of customers, like the banking sector of Switzerland, with the providers, can resolve this issue. And I think we have, at least here in Switzerland and in nearby country now, really a solid foundation they can build upon. It also shows in what Stefan was also alluding to, like this home office and residential use cases. This builds now on top of the same infrastructure that we built already for SFN. And I think with that, it will become easier and easier, and there will be this network and snowball effect. But for us, the biggest challenge is definitely getting more SCiON routers deployed, and as such, more telco providers on board.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, Daniel mentioned before that getting hands on this technology was a really important aspect on one hand and difficult on the other hand, because it was new and the experience is a bit lacking there. And so there's different service models how you can consume this technology. Either you get it from the telco providers all in one, and the telco provider looks after the software upgrades and the regular day-to-day operations. But there's also the choice, of course, that you do it yourself. So Thomas, as I understood, you choose the latter, and you choose to do it sort of yourself. What brings a company like UBS to go into that space and, demonstrate capabilities to operate this kind of infrastructure?
I think that is very deeply ingrained into how we understand technology and how we try to deal with technology and how we want to leverage technology. As an example, we are not only having some corporate network with a couple of links, but in order to benefit from those the most, we moved our telecoms into network carrier hotels to get cheaper prices, and then we built a worldwide, all sites spanning carrier Ethernet backbone that allows us to control all the layers. And that is just one example to show why we would do such things. We want to have the handle directly on controlling technology and to leverage and get the most out of it. And that was a fundamental shift that UBS did with respect to infrastructure and technology a couple of years back, when it changed from being viewed as a commodity and as essentially a sink for cost, but over to where we see it as an absolutely vital asset. So today, UBS is, of course, a bank, but it is very much also a technology corporation. That's why UBS is also very present on ETH events when it is about demonstrating that we could be a valid employer. And that's the reasoning behind why we did this. And of course, personally, I like technology and I wanted to see what it can do. The challenges coming out of that adoption is a challenge that we're in very close interaction with Sam, of course, because SCiON today looks quite different to how enterprise technology in the network space normally looks. You just don't have your standard CLI that you log on, that you configure stuff, and there's a couple of things that creates problems for us to integrate, where we will have to get some risk and governance exceptions just because there's a couple of features that we still lack. So there's, besides there being reasons why we do it ourselves, there's also certainly a lot of reasons why we wouldn't have done it. But the disadvantages of not being front row to then drive the use of it and to use it as a basis for innovating, that just was too big a disadvantage. And anyway, at this stage, SSFN is very much an exploratory topic that, yes, within this year we want to bring to production maturity. I think what was mentioned in terms of chicken and egg there, where we'd like to see is ease of deployment. I can show that by, we run just short of 40 internet circuits worldwide. They're typically between 1 gig and 10 gig. And 2 out of those are in a country where they can, in principle, be SCiON enabled. And of course, we'd like to see more carriers that do that. But from those that in principle offer SCiON, it would be fantastic if we could, on that same link, just have it ingrained, just there, and then our services, those that would be SCiON aware, they could just use it. And I think in order to grow the community, that might be a way to try and do it. I know that there's lots and lots of complexities and reasons why we wouldn't want to do it even if we were offered it, because there may be more components in the path that can fail. But I think to make it more simply consumable, to me is imperative. That is, I would totally agree with Eliseo and Stefan.
I see there's lots of ideas around there, and which is also an idea, or a purpose, an outcome. And if you embrace this technology, new ideas come out of it and new ways of using it. How does that work at Swisscom? Is there somebody, coming in with a bright idea, then carrying the flag and say, hey, I want to SCiOnize everything, and then he needs to gather enough followers for it to become a product, or how does that work at your end?
It's a good question, actually. Sometimes it is like that, but very often that approach also naturally fails. Right? I mean, if you look back over the last years, we have tried a couple of things which didn't work out. It is really chicken and egg. No? I mean, who has the next cool big idea that is actually scaling and where everybody has a benefit and which becomes an avalanche at the end of the day. Once you have the idea, then the painful process of finding budget and development resources and priorities and I mean, everybody in a big company knows that how this is working. So it's not a self-fulfilling prophecy, not a self-running thing. The good ideas are scarce. I mean, what is the saying? An innovation is a good idea that brings money. Right? Mm-hmm. So both things have to come together, and that's not an automated process, let's say it that way.
Eliseo, if I may ask you, how do you see the market then for either, first of all, SSFN, which is sort of an application within SCiON, or an environment within SCiON, and then SCiON in general? I mean, you could offer also the Swiss ISD or any other ISD on your network. How do you see the market there?
Yes. First, let me chime in on what Stefan said. You usually need an ambassador and a business case. But in this specific case, I think having SSFN as a working case, it makes the discussion different. Because when you talk about innovation and so on, it takes time until the product is there, then sales run with it, and until it becomes a success, until you have the first one in. And in the case today where SSFN is working, even though it's it's at an initial state, you can refer to that and you can see something working. So I think that's very positive in the sense of market introduction. How I see it, so I think there are a couple of use cases that I think do make sense and will help the adoption. One is the home use case. I think that's in terms of massifying the use and in terms of also providing an easier to onboard access. So can you just click and get it kind of thing. I think that will create definitely more interest on other market segments, other verticals. I think looking at an end-to-end solution that is SCiON enabled, and here specifically talking about the whole migration to the cloud that is happening now, which is really a macro trend. If we can also enable that and provide a solution that is clean and elegant end-to-end, where you say you have not only the connection among my locations, but also I have access to the cloud vendors. I think that would you just close the package and make it a complete package. And so we have had other verticals also interested. I mean, it's not only the banking segment that is talking about SCiON. So I am positive that there will be other communities that will see the value in being protected by the technology.
So, Daniel, you had a bit more experience, a bit longer experience, and also different fields of applying SCiON, like the academia and research networks, and of course also SSFN. Where do you see the obstacles in deploying SCiON, and have there been revelations where SCiON is maybe not as good as promised?
Well, obstacles I see mainly in the chicken and egg problem Sam already mentioned. So especially in our case, we run the research network in Switzerland. So this means basically all organizations that exchange data between amongst each other, they are connected to the same network, to our network, which leads to the situation that SCiON doesn't bring much of a benefit because it is an inter-domain routing protocol. And for that, obviously, you need to cross network borders to have a real benefit of it, besides the cryptographic signature of packets. So chicken and egg problem is certainly the most ongoing issue that we're trying to escape from by deploying SCiON in the research world globally. Or we start with SCiON, which is the European research network. There we found 2 other research networks, France and Germany, who are willing to participate. So there will be a deployment whenever the service will be delivered in March now, I think. And this is the first try to escape the chicken and egg problem to gain more global footprint, to actually have research data that is able to cross multiple SCiON-enabled networks. So I think this is really the main issue at the moment. And another point where we try to escape the chicken and egg problem is by finding more use cases that where SCiON really brings a benefit. So, for example, the transportation of big amounts of research data that we're looking into building something that is called a Science DMZ with SCiON. This is currently ongoing. So we're looking for niche use cases where SCiON really brings a benefit, and then try to escape the chicken and egg problem by getting more footprint.
45 years ago or so, I just read in the newspaper, Pink Floyd brought out Animal, and there is another song from Pink Floyd which is called Comfortably Numb. The more senior people probably know it. Sam, have consumers gone comfortably numb? So when advertising really good properties like, I don't know, security and availability and something really great, and people just don't react. And they are more even so, they're not willing to pay a penny for these nice properties. What has happened?
Several things, I think. I hear lots of different reactions to pitches that we do about, the greatness of SCiON. The most prominent one will be, well, if I just encrypt my data, why would I care, right? And I think, that has worked for a lot of organizations in the past quite well. But I think also with the growing level of interconnectivity, right, that we have today, like the pandemic, of course, introduced this whole home office thing at the really large scale. That is new. But also before that, moving to the cloud, not having everything in your corporate data center at the central location, or not having actually that many different communication parties that you have to communicate with to do business, kind of made these existing solutions somewhat workable, and also the attack surface was not that big. But I think when you look at any kind of metric, be it number and size of DDoS attacks on the internet, be it amount of money extorted by ransomware attacks, or any other metric, they all rise. And I think the sensitivity to these kind of risks, to cyber risks, is increasingly growing. And that's why I think we are moving away a bit from that numbness of why should I care about cybersecurity. I think that is one of the biggest driver for why people are now interested in SCiON. Also being able to contain your traffic to certain jurisdictions, for example, or geographies. I think that's becoming increasingly more important in certain verticals. I think where we don't yet have the same level of awareness is probably with availability and resiliency. Like, of course, SCiON is often positioned as a security product and a security architecture, and that's certainly also how it started out. Even back 9 years ago when we did the foundational research on it. But I'm personally very excited about its availability and actually optimizing the usage of a network that it can bring, right? And here I think the internet has done a very decent job, right? Also driven by a lot of the residential use cases and the usage of the internet that made actually the existing internet service providers to really improve their internet architecture and infrastructure by a lot. It has been good enough for a lot of these use cases. Where we see awareness here is especially critical infrastructures. But I think also once you can see the benefits of a SCiON-based solution, right? Really also in terms of availability and resiliency, I think at that point the awareness will also trickle then to non-critical infrastructures, maybe eventually even to the home users. And I hope that over time this numbness will fade a bit. Definitely also because we rely more and more on networks, right? I mean, that's a trend that will just continue.
Do you see this numbness too, Thomas? Or is it more a reluctation to adopt two new technologies because they might also fail?
No, I don't see numbness at all, actually. On our side, I see a lot of eagerness to adopt new technology. Where our challenge is, networks fundamentally have the tasks in UBS to develop global solutions. And that's, of course, where the availability of the service comes in. And I would certainly saving cost is a very, very important aim for us. I mean, I mentioned that Ethernet-based network, and actually that effort paid off in the end. We got the net savings out of getting, just immeasurably more bandwidth. And out of this here, one of our early use cases or interests was actually an SD-WAN type of service. And what I would like to see is that some of those technologies that offer SD-WAN with, sometimes deplorably poor solutions to availability, they would adopt, really capable technology like SCiON in the underlay. That would, in our eyes, that would be ideal. Of course, that would then also, if a big provider of such technology came on board, that would also then drive adoption by ISPs, because they would have the power of persuasion, I think. Another area where we are heavily investing in, as many companies do, is of course cloud. So if cloud access, if hyperscalers came on board and we could get cloud access with several paths open and that we could dynamically choose between, then why not go there? So I see actually quite a lot of use cases where we could start to get interested in. Another one is of course remote access. We at the moment, I think we have something like between 20 and 30,000 people, I think in Switzerland alone, that try and work for the bank. If we could give them a more reliable service where they are still up and running, even if the one or the other ISP goes away in Switzerland, which of course they never do, right? That would be a selling argument, and a lot of us, we pay lots of money to home ISPs. If we could get more guarantees that not only can our kids game, but also during the day at least, we get a much improved path to do what we need to do throughout the day in the home office, I think people would be willing to pay a premium for that. I'd be very surprised if not. So I think if there is a clear use case and there's availability of the product, I am quite certain that people would flock to it.
Do you see the same, Stefan, from your end, offering side?
I wish I would see exactly this flocking happening. Actually, I personally have often a different experience. If you ask a medium-sized company how much they're paying for fire extinguisher maintenance over the year, the fire policy or insurance over the year, and then asked, are you willing to pay half of that for internet security? You get a no, right?
Right.
So there is still a certain amount of numbness, definitely, and it probably has to do with the fact that everybody knows that fire burns and it's painful, but cybersecurity risks are still a bit of abstract. So there is not exactly the flocking happening yet, but maybe over time it comes, but not yet, unfortunately.
We have seen the disruption during the pandemic at the beginning, especially regarding home office use. And you, ISPs, you did a great job in providing and stabilizing, if not already it happened before, that everybody could really do it. Has that worn off already? That experience of, I need to change, I need to adapt, and I need to embrace technology also to make sure that my workforce can continue to work just by, providing these traditional services?
I mean, there was. I mean, it definitely was a peak in the beginning. I mean, the number of voice channels, the internet bandwidth, lots of these services were on high demand then. I think that has flattened now, logically, to a certain extent. Now it's moved to the applications. I mean, the rise of Teams usage in Switzerland, if you look at that curve, that is enormous, for example, but other applications as well. Still ongoing, still, of course, everybody is aware that it's relevant, but it has reached a plateau now.
So maybe talking about risks, of adopting the technology, then is SCiON simply too late, Sam?
Too late.
Too late. It should have been there at the beginning of the pandemic. That was one of my thoughts that I had. Oh, we're a bit late.
Yeah, of course. I guess it would have. This argument is always true, right? Would have been nice if we would have been already there in the 80s. If actually SCiON would have been the original BGP. I guess yes and no, right? Of course. Given also now COVID happened, it would have been great if every Swiss internet service provider would have been able to offer SCiON home user access, right? In 2020. Of course, would have been great. Of course, it would have been great if the internet was not as huge as it is now, because then structures are not that stagnant yet, and it's kind of SCiON needs something at the infrastructure level. And of course, touching something that is as important as the internet is very difficult. On the other hand, of course, also the increased usage of the internet, the increased reliance on the internet, boosts something like SCiON, as in gives it a chance to be recognized, to be also valued as it really solves a problem that we have, right? And I think it's more a question of how can we transition from today to tomorrow, right? And we have heard it also this morning. For example, this SBES idea, where we invest a lot of time and a lot of thinking, a lot of brain power into how can we make current internet with SCiON internet operable, right? Or as actually all of you are using, especially Thomas and Fritz, your organizations are using this SCiON Edge Gateway, one of our products, that basically its main purpose is to translate between classical IP-based communication and tunnel it over SCiON network, right? That's its primary purpose. Its secondary purpose then, of course, how to optimize then the usage of the SCiON network, and so on and so forth. I think we've invested a lot of time and a lot of development into making SCiON something that is incrementally deployable, and also becomes automatically better the more the SCiON network grows. Of course, if it would have been there from the very beginning, all of this would not be needed. But on the other hand, I think also launching an internet technology in the 80s probably would have been very hard, because the internet was not what it was. So it's a double-edged sword. It's great that the internet is so important that can really boost the demand for a technology like ours. But on the other hand, of course, we have to invest quite some time and effort into making this a smooth transition, because we all know there cannot be a flag day on the internet.
Mm-hmm. So I think SCiON is actually changing or revolutionizing the foundation of the internet. And if I may say so, since the house is already built, it's always a bit tricky to exchange the foundation, right? A key aspect there, which I see over time at least, is standardization and governance on a broader scale than just the governance I talked about regarding SSFN. I'm speaking about the standardization organizations like IETF or ISO or IEEE. And maybe the question goes to all of you, beginning maybe with Eliseo. Is that a key element that you're asked, whether these protocols are standardized or whether you can rely on them to be, pretty stable and unchanged for a couple of years or so? Or is that more, your choice to just trust that the protocols are designed reliably and hard enough so that they can withstand change?
So first, let me just add something to what Sam said. Whether too late or too early, I think what we didn't have in the 80s was the understanding of what it meant for the internet to be broken. And that's what we have now. Where some of our customers are saying, the cost of disruption is so and so. And therefore, I need a solution that, not independently of the price, that's never the case. But we need a solution that, despite of a cost, it solves a problem that would cost much more if we didn't have a solution for that. So I think that's important to understand, because I think nowadays, and also now with the extensive use of data, and that will continue for the next years, I think the impact of something going wrong, it has a cost. And the higher the cost is, the more interesting SCiON is for the user. Whether standardization or not. It's an interesting question. I think it in general helps to have standardized protocols, in the sense that you're sure that whenever you buy an equipment that supports it, you will have that with very clear guidelines. It will be very standardized how it works. On the other side, what the standardization does not bring is flexibility. So if you do not have the pressure and the time and the costs of having to standardize a protocol, then you can talk to the vendor, modify it, deploy it, that's it. So there's pros and cons. Of course, when you look at the global picture, and if you want to have international ISPs on board, then of course it would be good that you can say, well, you take this vendor, it's already standardized, just go ahead and use it, which I understand Anapaya is anyways doing partially at the moment. But going on the actual IETF, IEEE, and so on, it's very time consuming, it's very slow, and as said, it limits the flexibility on the protocol itself.
What is your experience there, Daniel?
Well, first, to the necessity of standardization, I think it really is in some form necessary to find a global footprint and to bring on board a lot of ISPs. It would also help to have more Anapayas around, so more vendors of equipment and suppliers. But then on the other hand, SCiON consists, if you break it down into the details, consists of lots of protocols that probably need to be standardized on their own, coming together to a huge SCiON thing. And my experience, I was involved in standardization of one protocol, which took almost 10 years, and that was way simpler than SCiON. So I suspect that this will take a long, long time until it's officially standardized. But still, I think it is a good thing to set as a goal, but it's certainly not an option to wait until it's standardized.
Is this true also for large enterprises like UBS?
Two answers. I really couldn't care less is one of them. And the other is, it's absolutely imperative, and it should be here now, because I mentioned those shy of 40 ISP links that we have. I'd like to have them all SCiON enabled. If I wanted that, I'd have to have a Verizon on board, a level 3, a Zayo, China Telecom, a KDDI, and I don't get that without it being an officially endorsed entity. So as soon as it becomes essentially imperative that as an ISP you have it, it's probably an illusion to hope that we'll get it with the footprint that we have. And from that respect, absolutely. And the way we design stuff today, like XML, which has extensible in its very name, that is, I think, how things should be, and today are standardized, if they are standardized, always with an extension in mind. And then new stuff like, I don't know, CO2-aware routing attributes, like multi-protocol BGP, You can latch on any next hop property just by doing some extension. And if that is being kept in mind, which I'm sure it is in academia, then I see absolutely no harm in standardizing it. Because then you get both, right? You get the core that's standardized, endorsed, it's official. You cannot make a mistake going to it. But you also have an ability, and you maintain the ability for an ETH, for any university to add to it. So in my eyes, yeah, go. And try and be simple and be brief with the core of it. I mean, if only, I don't know, if it's 10 protocols, if only one of them is standardized, you at least have a standard. And then you can go, look, this is it. Yeah, you need a couple of other things to it. But I would be very much in favor of it if we think it's going to be part of our technology portfolio going forward.
Every new endeavor, every new technology brings risk on various levels. You have business risk, you have operational risk, you have technical risk, some risks which you can mitigate, some others you have to accept. One risk that we've seen in SSFN particularly is the risk of losing the network because of unavailability of certificates and failing to renew certificates. Thomas, maybe again to you. Do you see technology risks that you are where you're hesitant then to adopt technologies like SCiON?
I think at the moment our stance probably is to keep another technology to the side that we can change to. That's probably the answer at the moment. If I take a step back, then I can reframe your question and say, so for how we interconnect to financial markets now, what are our choices? Where we connect to SIX, well, it's actually a couple of fibers, and it's firewalls, and it's IP, and it's routing. There is no alternative technology, and we've come to trust it. And what is it? It's essentially the same foundation as the internet has. Yeah, sprinkle a couple of firewalls on top of it, but at the core of it, it's the technology that we've come to trust because we know it works. Does SCiON have those credentials? Well, at the moment, no. But I see no reason why it shouldn't get that over time. Of course, when we do risk assessment for this, and the really production kind, that's still ahead of us. We have done the investigations for pilot. When we do for production, of course, the aspect that at the moment there's one vendor only that we can buy this from. That is what sets it apart from what we do in the traditional world. We do not have two vendors for firewalls where we connect to you at the moment, very true, but we could. With SCiON, we do not have a second vendor, but also we couldn't. And that, I think, that is the difference at the moment. And I would say that's a fairly minimal difference. So do we view the risk of this technology fundamentally differently? No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. All right. How does it look like at the ISP end, Eliseo? Stefan?
We see fundamentally not an increased risk for us. It's a technology also because the way it's implemented is, as Thomas said, is built on the same, let's say, recipe as the technology we use today. Maybe the only thing to mention is, that was already mentioned by Daniel, I think, that the knowledge base, the pool of experts that need to finally take care of the solution, that is, because the technology is new, it's at an infant stage. And there we need to make sure that this is taken over by the people who are doing this job. Other than that, in terms of the technology and given our experience so far, I would say it doesn't have any additional risk compared to another technology.
Does it look the same at Swisscom?
I would just maybe add one thing. It's always good, you mentioned it, Thomas, to have a second vendor, right? Because if, building something like SSFN on just one choice and one option of a vendor is a certain risk. So if something, I don't wish so, I don't hope so, but if something would happen to the single vendor which we have there, that's a problem. Then if it's bought, if it's not successful in the market, then it's always good to have a reserve. But over time, I believe that will fix itself.
Yeah, and I think at the moment that the main risk there is actually not with the protocols or the foundational technology, but it's actually more in the management of it. And that's, I think, where also Anapaya adds the biggest added value. And that's why we are interested to go a couple of additional steps with Anapaya, because they do add value on top there.
We have a bit less than 5 minutes left, so I would ask a last question, which might tempt you to spend too much time on, so be very brief, please. What is your vision for SCiON? And I would like to ask Sam first.
So the dreamer first, I guess. Well, obviously, my vision is that SCiON becomes the internet standard, right? That's what Adrian and I discussed way back 9 years ago, right? We want SCiON to become the new standard underpinning the internet for any internet use, right? Right now, of course, we're targeting critical infrastructure. I think that's the right thing to do. I think that's where these are the targets that are willing to adopt such technology first. But in the end, I think that once the infrastructure is there, everybody should be able to use it and see the benefit of it. It should become a commodity, right? Not sure if we ever get there, of course not. It's also not, even if we don't get there, I think the entire undertaking can still be very successful. But my vision would be an internet based on SCiON entirely.
Thank you. Daniel?
I think I see the most chances at the moment in such a setup as the SSFN, where you have a heterogeneous user group wanting to form a network, a trusted network. So solutions in those business areas are something that are quite useful right now, where you have lots of ISPs involved working together. For a global footprint or for wider adoption, I think there must be more footprint available in order to make it useful for the end users. And of course, applications need to be adapted to be SCiON aware to make use of the nice features SCiON brings. So I'm a bit more skeptical. We now decided to give it a chance for a couple of years to provide SCiON as a service and to strive for more footprint, in our case, especially in the academic world. And let's see if it takes up within the next few years.
Stefan?
On a technology level, my vision is similar to Sam's. So in a couple of years from now, it should be as common as TCP or BGP and just as normal. And on a governance level, I wish that more communities form in the next couple of years comparable to SSFN, and that we have some governance leaders stepping forward and take up that ball.
Nice. Thank you. Eliseo?
In the very short term, I would like to see a very broad SSFN that we can also use as a footprint. So many users, many sites using the technology. In the midterm, I would like to see other communities in different verticals where we can provide a similar level of security, a similar level of service.
Thank you. And last but not least, Thomas?
There's not that much to add, I feel. But I think the vision would be that SCiON becomes a commodity, something that's just available. And what I think we can contribute, and it's always important for such visions to have a first step to go, is to make it a raging success on SSFN. If we have that as a truly working, outstanding service, then we can hopefully use that to get it to visibility outside of Switzerland, because this is what at the moment it is. It is very much a Swiss thing, and my vision would be to break it out of being a Swiss thing, but to be a technology thing that becomes, well, there's beacons in SCiON, right? That becomes a beacon of hope and change for the global internet.
This is great. Thank you very much for that encouraging outlook. And thank you very much for participating here in this inspiring and engaged discussion today. I'm sure that we will hear lots of other stories from the field in the future, and I hope that this was inspiring you out there to form these communities and bring on these services and go to your ISPs and ask for this better internet and this new renovated infrastructure that you could get with SCiON. And with that, I'd like to hand back to Leah for some closing words.
Thank you. Thank you, Fritz. Thank you, gentlemen, for that very productive discussion. We will now pause for lunch. Coming up, the Swiss National Bank, more from the Swiss National Bank, the Swiss federal government, from UBS, from SIX, and other experts who will share their experiences with SCiON. So see you at 2 o'clock. And in the meantime, enjoy some demo videos courtesy of Swisscom, Sunrise, and Intercloud. Thank you.